I am super excited to introduce someone who, like, I'm not only a huge fan of, but I actually get to call a close personal friend. And she has seen every facet of esports. I'm talking from the early Frozen Throne days. I'm talking the toxicity of Dota 2. She's done product review, talent management, everything from like public relations to event coordination. This is someone who makes me better at my own job, someone who like challenged me to push barriers and like think about success and content production flow. So I humbly introduce you, Humber Hawks, to someone who I consider one of the most important people in modern esports. Give a huge welcome to one team, one dream. It's Zorine T. Welcome, Zorine. Thank you for coming.
Woo! Wow. Woo! Thank you. Wow, that was the most amazing introduction I've ever had to anything. So thank you kindly, Jackie. Uh,
Welcome. I'm
it's
super.
a,
I'm so glad to have you. I'm so glad. How like just check in. Like, how are you? COVID's a wild situation. How are you feeling?
Pretty good, all things considered. Very busy. Work has been great. I think I'm very fortunate to be working in an industry that has been, while we've been impacted by COVID, we are also able to continue business. So that's been very good. And I'm based in Los Angeles, where things are, kind of like awful, but we're still managing. We're still managing.
And I'm just happy to see you're safe, you're surviving and thriving, and just it's just so exciting. But I want to kind of take a little trip down memory lane with you to get kind of accustomed to getting because the students are kind of right now where you started out, right? So I want to go back to does a Gizmodo X review ring any kind of bells? So Zorine's humble beginnings are, doing these really fun parody reviews we're seeing on YouTube to like throwing your
Oh
wallet at
God.
Steam sales, and then I saw you did like the Gizmodo like a contest. It was like an esports kind of contest for product review, and then you're kind of curating your own talent to now uh, you know, really what I consider a very big deal in the industry, working at Player 2 and, in charge of very big clientele and, very big important parts of the industry. So I guess I'll kind of put it into like from where you decided to stop writing for GameSpot and take that leap and get into LA. So how did you and then from LA you worked at Yahoo Esports, which I think is kind of like the big you were kind of ahead of the wave and Yahoo was ahead of the wave of that. So let's talk about the
Yeah.
journey from Australia to LA.
Yeah. So, I'm Australian. I started off in Australia and I was working at CBS Australia in the office there, writing at GameSpot, not to be confused with the GameStop that is now currently making headlines everywhere on all the major news outlets. But GameSpot, the website, which focuses on gaming content, and I was an editor there. It was an amazing gig. We did like written content and video content for gaming, news, reviews, previews, you name it, everything that had to do with gaming and touched upon gaming, we were specialized in. From there, working at GameSpot for so long, I made a lot of contacts, and this kind of thing happens, in jobs that you tend to work for a long time in the industry. Like over time, you'll develop your own network, which is very, very important, but also leads to future opportunities. So when I was at GameSpot, I had met someone there who was in esports. And one of the reasons why GameSpot had hired me in the first place was because they needed somebody who was focused on esports, and they needed someone who kind of to help them, I guess, broach this emerging space that they were interested in tapping into. So when I was at GameSpot, I met some people there who were moving over to Yahoo, who at the time was starting Yahoo Esports, and they needed someone to head up their news desk. They didn't have one yet. They needed someone to come in and establish one. And I was, a regular news writer at GameSpot. I was very used to and familiar with the news beat in the games industry, and they wanted to kind of, replicate that in the esports industry as well and bring that over. So when the Yahoo opportunity came about, it was one that I, really wanted to do for a long time, move into esports full time, which was awesome, but also be at a place where we could build something from the ground up. So that opportunity came, and Yahoo moved me from Sydney, Australia, which is where I was based before, to Los Angeles to work at the Yahoo offices in not Santa Monica, Playa Vista, excuse me, and really, create the team, start it fresh, and build what we had, planned from the ground up. It was a very exciting time.
Oh my goodness. So for those of you who haven't, if you haven't explored, Yahoo Esports is now defunct, but I mean the content and the quality of content, were you behind the writing of that as well?
Yeah, so I was a little bit. I was the managing editor at Yahoo, so a lot of my responsibilities and duties was to lead the editorial team, and I managed our team of writers as well as our contracted freelancers, and really helped shape the, I guess, because Yahoo was a new editorial publication, we needed to really establish what our tone would be, what our cadence would be, what kind of audience we were trying to go for, and what kind of content we were trying to publish. Did we want to be like do more cultural beat type content, or did we want to be more serious and do hardcore, hard-hitting news breaking content, that sort of thing. So it was really an interesting gig in that we got to decide that, and a lot of my job there was to help shape that and guide our writers down the pathway and really make it one cohesive voice for our publication.
I love that. And so you're there, you're managing this huge team, which is phenomenal. Like I'm like, again, I'm a fan first and a friend second. So just so the students know. But looking at like the content, how do you do that from the ground up? If there are students listening and they are in, backgrounds where they want to get in and kind of start something, how do you decide like the tone, the direction? What leads you to those kinds of decisions on where to take such a new company but then still esports?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think all our writers that we had on staff were very, they came from esports themselves. They were gamers themselves. So they really understood what the audience was and what made it up. At the same time, because we were so new, and the way we functioned as a team, even though Yahoo was like this big corporate entity, Yahoo Esports as the department, we functioned quite independently. We could be very nimble. We could almost like work at like a startup, in that we didn't really answer to anyone, but at the same time, we had like these internal checks and balances. So a lot of it was up to us to kind of decide. And a lot of what I liked, I brought over from my learnings at GameSpot, because GameSpot, I was a writer at GameSpot, so I'd been on that other side. I knew what it was like to be a writer before I became a managing editor, right? I was an editor and a regular contributor first. So I knew, what writers liked, what made it easier for writers, and I knew what the gaming audience liked. And we were allowed to kind of experiment a bit, but also, I really wanted to introduce a standard for our writing, like I guess the style guide that we wanted to use, the tone we wanted to use. Like, I didn't want us to go like too tabloidy, casual,
Yeah.
almost in that sense. So, and I think that really worked well for us in terms of like the views we were getting, the numbers we were getting, and that was I took a lot of that from the experience that I had writing at GameSpot, which was a site that had like over 20 million views like monthly, and we had like a lot of unique users, and had a lot of feedback going there. So I think a lot of it's also very stats driven. We could see like what was tractioning well with audiences, what audiences tended to like. And it was surprising actually sometimes to see what, articles would do a lot better than others. It would, sometimes the expectations wouldn't line up with what we were seeing. So really, in terms of content, a lot of it has to come through, I guess, experience. But if you're, someone new to content and you want to be a writer, whether it be writing, scripts for videos or writing articles or penning features, I think a lot of it comes with, practice. Like you really need to practice and develop that confidence in yourself and your writing ability to be able to, push yourself forward, but also be ready for when the opportunities come. And I think that's really important. So I think that's one thing that all the writers on staff had in common was that they were fairly confident in their writing ability, although some of them were a bit hesitant with ideas that they wanted to put forward for
Mhm.
specific pitches. They were all fairly confident in their writing ability, I would say.
That's so it's great too to hear that it's like an authentic voice is the main thing that you were bringing at Yahoo. And then for students who like they're lots of talent here at Humber. They're starting out though. What is like so let's talk about how you got into GameSpot and like how can they start getting kind of noticed in these kind of budding times of their own careers.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember being there myself as a graduate, finishing my degree at university and being like, what am I going to do now? Or being in my final year and thinking, I have no idea what I want to do. Like, I have no idea where to even start, right? I've got this degree, but where do I go? Um, Back then it was kind of interesting in that I never thought I could work in the games industry. I never thought I could get paid like to work full time to dedicate,
Right?
so much of my life to my love for video games or my passion for esports.
Mhm.
Um, but I think going back to like the whole practicing
Mhm.
outlook on things, like that was so important, right? So a lot of what I did, I think there were some things were happening around the same time. So like firstly, websites and blogs were starting to really take off,
Mhm.
and somewhat my father actually gave me gaming magazines where I could read reviews of games and read content there, and that was like wow, like these people are writing about video games, and I never thought that could be a thing.
Mhm.
And I was a huge writer. I was always a huge writer. My degree was specialized in communications and writing, so just combining these two things seemed natural, but also like kind of an experiment for me. So a lot of what I was doing was I was writing, I had my own blog, like this silly little blog that I would just write and write like all these different gaming articles for. And then I started pitching. I pitched to like all these different websites and I think only websites actually, not magazines, but only websites. But I started pitching to all these websites. 90% of the time, I would never hear back from them, like ever. But then, one or two of them would get back to me and be like, "Hey, like this is an interesting like idea you have. Like we want to publish it. We want to hear more about it. We want to, take you on board to write something about it." So, I think like definitely like, a lot of it was like firstly I had practiced writing so much that I was confident in my ability to cover these things or write confidently about these topics as an expert in the subject
Mhm.
matter, but also I was ready for the opportunity when it came. Like I could show them all these examples of things that I had lined up, like I can write, like this is what I can do, so um and I think that's really important. When I was at GameSpot and we were hiring people, we get a lot of applications from people who say they're like passionate gamers and they love video games, but then they don't have anything else to show us, like, and we have so many applicants for our jobs there. And this happened at Yahoo Esports too, when
Mhm.
we were hiring a news writer, and we got so many applications from people who were saying like, I love video games, I'd be perfect for this job. Well, show us
Right?
like
Yes.
anything. Like you don't have to be published at a big website or anything, but show us something that shows that you have what it takes to do this job properly.
Yeah,
So I think
the
that's important.
totally having pieces. And even like I like how you pointed out too, you the articles sometimes where you didn't know what was going to be successful and the analytics reflected something different. I think that's important for students to know too. Like just because you're not liking your own work at the time does not mean that there's not something special there and something that could take off. So just making the content itself is really important.
Absolutely. And like I think having more of it out there is definitely helpful. Like you never know who could stumble across something and really like it and be interested in your writing style or your content. Like it doesn't have to just apply to writing. It could be videos, it could be podcasts or something. So I definitely think getting that practice in and being able to show something for it is important. And I think this is what you can use to develop and like put together a portfolio to show, what you've learned and what you're good at.
Totally. I love it. Our videography team works extremely hard here. Our student volunteers are beyond amazing. In terms of, so let's talk about just like the video content of Yahoo Esports is really like the set is simple but great. The way it's shot is really well done. Were you ever involved in kind of the video part of things, like getting the production line together, and like what did that look like and sound like, just to give our students kind of a view of what to expect in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. So I did a lot of producing while I was at Yahoo for our different video content and coverage. And, in addition to that, like all the heads of all the departments, we'd get together to meet every week to kind of like make sure we're all aligning content. So, like, I would meet with the video executive producer and be like, hey, we've got these major features from our writers coming out this week. And they'd be like, and we would sync up like the video content with them, or we'd ask the writer to shoot like a short video to talk about their article. So there was like a kind of like a way for us to really get the most out of a piece of content. Um, in terms of like what the process looked like, it depends on like what we're shooting. I know at GameSpot as well, I was part of a very tight knit team in Australia, and we kind of overlapped in duties in terms of working on video and working on like I guess written articles as well. So like I had experience from working on video at GameSpot, which was very helpful in bringing over to doing video production at Yahoo Esports. Um, so at Yahoo, when we were covering events, the teams would be pretty small, like 3 or 4 at the most. We'd have like a host slash producer. Sometimes, a lot of the time, that doubled up because a lot of our hosts were like super talented and able to do both.
Mhm.
You'd have like the video editing team, and then you have like a camera operator who also has to double as a video editor sometimes. So it's a lot of like wearing different hats. I think it's helpful to be familiar with the process of like end to end video production from start to beginning. And that was, so like such an important requirement of what everyone did at Yahoo in terms of video production. You needed to be able to touch all the different points.
Mhm. Yeah, because I'll tell the students where Zorine and I first met was actually in my fostering of content. I was working for a team at the time called UIU, and Zorine's working at Player Two, and that is their PR firm. And so we crossed in this. We set up like a femme fatale female gaming weekend and flew everyone in. And so I thought I put together like a really good master doc, and then Zorine was like the first person in the industry who I met who was like, okay, but what's the turnaround time on this? What does your production schedule look like? And you just like opened my eyes to like content isn't just great ideas. Like it's the execution. But then after all of this stuff is filmed, you were like, okay, so what now? And I was like, I was like, "Oh my goodness, someone covered where I was weak, someone was there." So I just I really it really made me relook at producing content, because we filmed so much and you're like, "Okay, that's great. How are you gonna now take all of this and churn it out?" And I think those are really important building blocks too for students, because lots of people, everyone's an idea person. Everyone's got ideas, and then filming it hundreds of hours of footage, and then you were like, okay, so how are you going to get it out? And I was like, this person, this is the person. This, she knows. She knows.
Yeah.
Like, it was so cool, and I could really see like all those years of experience like in one quick question. I was like, you just set the tone of how this weekend's going. It was
Yeah, I
awesome.
mean, that's sort of like, the marketing of content is super important. And that's something that we had at Yahoo as well. To go back to that as an example, when all the heads of the departments met, that also included our marketing social media person, so that, she would know to coordinate, how to promote all this content and push it out when, and we could kind of all be on the same page about when everything was going up, when it was going to be promoted, when we were going to give it another push, that sort of thing. And it was just like one just really well oiled machine, I guess, working together with all the different parts doing their jobs.
Yeah. How did you so what does that pipeline kind of look like and sound like? Because I find a lot of times, if you're a student, you're like, we have these ideas, we want to do the direction. How do we now execute having the act 1, act 2, act 3, not to make it about drama, but I'm a drama student. So like how do you
Yeah.
how do you set up those acts?
Yeah, I think it's important to have a standardized timeline or format that everyone's used to working to. Definitely, like once you get into the rhythm of things, it helps a lot. Typically, there's like a pre-production phase, and then there's like the actual, production phase itself, and then there's like post-production, and then after that is like the marketing and publicate, like the publishing aspect. So, typically, we start with pre-production, which is concepting the idea and hashing it out, and making sure that everyone understands what the goal of the content is. And then we would move into the production phase, which is like organizing the shoot. And I think the producer's role in all of these is very important because the producer's responsibility is making sure that everything gets executed when it should, at the time that it should. So during production, that's when the shoot actually happens, when content gets filmed, everything gets like put together, and then post production is when the editors come into play. They start putting together and putting like stringing together all the different, I guess, pieces of video that need to go together, and adding graphics and etc. And then, lastly, there's the publishing and marketing and social media aspect. Like when the video or piece of content goes up, who hears about it? How do we get it out to as many people as possible and make people care about this? So the messaging of that is super important.
Mm. Yeah, because I guess our audience, it's other collegiate students. And like for
Hmm.
me, managing the team, I think it's super important to like touch base with the kids because like I come off really old. Like I've never felt older. So I really like being in this space just because the student voice is so important and reaching like a student demographic. I'll do like I remember when the students was just like, no, we don't say that anymore. That meme is done. And I was like, okay.
Oh God.
Hi fellow kids. So I think so how do you kind of try to capture, gaming terms in writing without I guess dating yourself? It seems hard. It seems like a difficult industry to stay relevant in.
Hmm, that's an interesting one. I mean, it is, but I think, ultimately, if the people who are working on the content are in it themselves, they understand, or at least they have demonstrated a strong understanding of the audience and are experts in it. I think that can help a lot. And that was like a big part of why we were hiring who we did at Yahoo. We hired the people who we believed to be like the forerunning experts in the space for whichever game that they were specialized in. And that's why we actually adopted that model in the first place, to hire people who were specialized in that particular, sector. We can't use the same person to cover a CS:GO tournament as we would to cover a Smash tournament. Like they just wouldn't know. And esports, I think everyone kind of makes this, I guess outsiders make this assumption that esports is like this one thing where you can like define the audience as one whole like sector, but it's not. It's very like um compartmentalized. So similar to sports, I usually use the analogy where I compare it to sports, whereas like a fan of football may not be the same as a fan of golf. Like you can't say that they're sports fans are all the same. So
Hmm.
similarly, I would say that esports fans are not all the same. So, hiring the correct people to make sure that they are naturally interested and keep up with what's happening in the space and in the industry is very important.
Yeah. So let's unpack like hiring and resumes. What were some kind of really gold stars you would see on applications other than the portfolio piece? What were you how did you kind of connect with a resume and think, yeah, this is a good fit for a team?
Yeah, I think it depends on a couple of things. Obviously, like having correct grammar and spelling and everything on their resume was important. what I what would have really stood out to me is if like they showed or demonstrated that they had done their extra research, or gone the extra
Ah.
mile to really research the team or the publication or the people there already, and like understood like who we were and what we were trying to do. and our mission. Um, there is one particular intern who was like a diamond in the rough for us, who we found. Her name is Ovly May. You may know her. She is an LCS, or formerly was an LCS interviewer and host, and now she does freelance content. But when we hired her, she was still in college. She was an intern, and she had started doing these YouTube videos covering collegiate Overwatch. And when
Okay,
we
that's our
saw
space. That is our space, students. Yeah, I love
Yeah,
that.
we saw her channel. It wasn't getting a lot of views or anything, but we were super impressed by the quality of the content. Brought her in for like an interview and kind of this trial summer internship, and she was like so great. She was so eager to learn, open to feedback. Really listened carefully to everything we taught her, and we kind of like took her under our wing, which
Mhm.
was a great experience. And she is now one of the biggest and most, I guess, active hosts in esports. And it's amazing to see. And she really worked hard, and she had that portfolio of content that really drew our attention in the first place, right? So,
Mhm.
that I think that's like a really great success story.
Look at that. Zorine cultivated that talent and now she's out there. Wow. That's exciting. Being
Yeah.
open, like you said being open to feedback. Uh how can students kind of open their mind? Like what are typical feedback? Because it is really tough taking criticism, but I think it's an important part of growing who you are. Like what are typical like criticism feedbacks that you give just so when they get into the industry, they're not kind of blindsided by, there's too much glow in this graphic.
Yeah, no, totally understand what you mean. I mean, I remember when, I was fresh out of university and wanted to work in gaming and esports, and I was like, who are these boomers? They don't know anything about games. Like, why are they running the show? And I thought as a gamer myself, I was like, I know the audience so well. I know everything about games. I can't possibly. I was so arrogant. But, when I got into the industry and I saw like, oh, they're running the show because they know how to run an actual business and monetize this. And I think it's so important to be humble about that, and, really take the time to learn and listen and know that, this business has been around for longer than you've been working in it, that's for sure. So, really take the time to understand what makes, certain companies successful or organizations successful in the space. And if you can, get a good mentor to learn from, and really dedicate yourself to listening and learning and absorbing everything. I think that's so
Yeah,
important.
totally. Oh my goodness. And then Yahoo Esports did its little fade to black, and we always talk about every time I have someone on, they always talk about just like how volatile esports is, and it's a company one day and it's not a company the next, and it's almost unpredictable. So how do you now transition into kind of keeping the dream alive and getting into player 2?
hmm Yeah, when Yahoo Esports, ended its run, it was very sad. I did consulting for a little bit, did some startups as well. And then Player Two, which is a marketing firm that specializes in gaming and esports, approached me and had an opportunity to transition to marketing, which was something, I always wanted to transition to the business side of things for a while. I think, being able to lead a team at Yahoo Esports, and also in some ways lead a team back at GameSpot, was really valuable experience in imbuing these kind of insights into the business side of things.
Hmm.
So being able to make that transition over to an agency was such a great opportunity that I could not say no to it, basically.
Right.
And
Yeah.
have two amazing, mentors who taught me so much about marketing and the industry. And I think, making that transition made a lot of sense, and it was something I'd wanted to do for a long time. And, now what I do as marketing director at Player Two is, it's been such a wild ride and crazy to see the way the industry is today and the clients that we work with today being interested in esports and gaming. So it was almost like a natural transition, because they wanted someone who was an expert in the space. and was willing to help, I guess, teach the more about the business, the marketing side,
Yeah.
and but really wanted someone who understood the audience. Again, going back to that whole understanding the audience
Authentic. You got
was
to in
yeah,
gaming. You
that's right.
got to.
Having that authentic connection to the space was so important for them as well. And I think the network as well, which, going back to what
Mhm.
I mentioned before about like developing networks in the industry is super important. So all those things kind of led to like a perfect storm, I guess, of an opportunity.
That's so good. And then, so we've been exploring LinkedIn a lot. Do you find that that is a good resource for networking? And can should students be more involved, less involved? I've been pushing the LinkedIn just because it's given me lots of opportunities. Are there kind of places where they can make those moments?
I say LinkedIn is a very good start. I call it Facebook for adults. But yeah, LinkedIn is fantastic. It's a great way to kind of familiarize yourself with different companies as well and see who's working where. And definitely an opportunity to like bulk up your own resume, see like what other people have put on theirs, and get an idea of what kind of playing field looks like.
Mhm.
Highly recommend brushing up a LinkedIn profile and poking around and really developing your expertise. It's not the end of the world if you don't have a LinkedIn or you don't want to do LinkedIn, but I do recommend it as a great opportunity.
Yeah. When I started out streaming, the big push was Twitter. And everyone said if you don't have a Twitter, like you're not relevant in esports and you need Twitter, and even more than Instagram, like you have to be active on Twitter. And do you find that the Twitter landscape is still important in esports, or where are companies kind of looking to get their talent acquisition?
Absolutely. Twitter is so, so crucial. I'm glad you brought it up. A lot of people, when I was, when the Yahoo Esports, closure happened, a lot of people actually reached out to me on Twitter, and a lot of companies reached out to me via Twitter to talk about consulting for them or doing content with them. So definitely a big opportunity as well there at Twitter. And I think Twitter actually was one of the things that I used to help me familiarize myself with the team at GameSpot Australia back when I, was still looking for a job and before I got into GameSpot even. And I was like, who are these people who work at this company and what do they do and what does the landscape look like? And it was a really, I guess, also like super, super crucial tool for me to familiarize myself with the whole games industry in general and see like all the people who are working in it. So I highly, I think it's very important to not to post on social media, but like to use social media as a tool where you can keep atop of everything and keep up to date with what's happening in the industry.
Totally. And like it's a double-edged sword though, because I used to be the whatever pops into my head, I'm gonna tweet. And whatever I'm doing at an event, I'm gonna tweet. And even if I'm up at 4 in the morning with this company, I'm tweeting about it. And I what I noticed in my years in the industry is just the company doesn't want people to know they're working you to the bones at 4 a.m. So how can students still kind of be it's tough. How can you still be as a gamer like true to yourself, but then also like palatable, and like do you have any tips for students on like shaping their social media brand so it's not disingenuous but it's still hireable?
Yeah, I know what you mean. This is actually, so relevant to today, right? Social media is so pervasive, but definitely keep track of your digital footprint. If an employer or potential employer Googles your name, what are they going to find? I think keeping track of that is super important. Um, some people keep portfolios on like a website that they've created themselves. That could be super helpful too, depending on what you want to do. I know I keep like a portfolio on my website, which is great to kind of easily point people to. Um, but I think I would say Twitter is, it's so public. Be cognizant of what you say on such a public platform. It stays there not forever, but almost forever. So I wouldn't tweet or push out anything that you wouldn't be comfortable saying in front of a potential employer or someone you get trying to get to hire you. Um, and if anything, if you really feel the need to make a social, like a private, social profile that you keep with just you and your friends or something like that. I think, you
Mhm.
need to drawing that line between professionalism and personalism is a hard one. I understand that. But, there are places where it's appropriate and there are places where it's not.
Yeah, totally. And you yourself are verified on Twitter. So do you find that that has kind of helped you to be taken more seriously in the industry where you're like, "Oh, not only do I have a voice on here and a platform, but like I also have the check mark." And has that kind of helped bolster, the things that you're doing?
Hmm. I don't know, actually. I don't To be honest, I don't care much for for the verification or social media in
You're the
general, but
first person. My other verified friends, and some shall not be named, they were like, "Well, I've got a check mark, little miss."
I mean, I can see why it exists, but I don't particularly think so. I know there are advantages to having that, that little symbol there, but if you keep like good company, you keep good contacts, you network with people in the industry in a genuine way, it doesn't necessarily like you don't necessarily have to have something like a verification mark.
There you go, kids. The check mark don't make you real. You make yourself real. Beautiful. Beautiful. And then kind of last thing I want to touch on is students. Zorine does interviews of all kinds. Like you've got like boots on the ground style interviews where it's like you, a mic and a camera, and you're meeting like huge personalities, to your newest endeavor, which is boss battles, which I think is one of the coolest effing series of videos I've ever seen. Like
Thank
watching
you.
the HyperX one where I didn't even know it was a branch of Kingston, and just unfolding all of that. So kind of what started it all? Did you just kind of go rogue and get these small interviews and that set you up to do bigger interviews? Or do you like just like you, the mic and the camera? How do you kind of prep and book interviews? Like, let's unpack just getting interviews in, because there's lots of students that want to get into that, want to get into hosting, making their content.
Yeah, definitely. I think I've always wanted to like video content is like a huge passion of mine. I don't think I'll ever stop doing it, to be honest, even on the side as a personal project. And I've always got like personal project ideas like rolling on the side that I try to execute. Um, I guess, depending to the students who want to be camera hosts or interviewers themselves, I would say really practice, and again develop that confidence in yourself. I went to acting school for a couple of years, so that was a huge help in getting comfortable in front of the camera, and being able to develop that rapport with your subjects on camera is such a rare but also crucial skill for something like this.
Mhm.
Um, and interview formats can be, they can be so formal or informal depending on what you want to do, but really, figure out what works best for you
Okay.
and how you like to conduct interviews. I also, looked to some of the best interviewers in the world and saw how they conducted their interviews. Like the best interviewers in the world are so masterful at their craft that they can almost get their subject to say anything that they want them to.
Right.
So
Yeah, because
it's
yours always feel so warm. Like every time I watch them, like I really feel like, especially in boss battles, like I was like, there's such a warmth to these interviews, and like every guest just felt. I don't, it was I rewatched all of them. I was just like, it's so much
oh, thank you.
knowledge packed into 20 minutes, and you're just like, it feels like you're at tea with an aunt, you know? It was so cool.
Yeah, I mean, that's just how I prefer to style my interviews. Like, I like to make the subject feel comfortable. I like to sit down and make it feel like a very intimate conversation with them, if you will. But it doesn't work for everyone, and sometimes it can be a struggle. Some subjects just won't open up at all, and I have had bad interviews where I, walk away afterwards and think like, man, that interview like really sucked, or like that piece of content did not go as well as I hoped it would, and it's awful. But that
Yeah.
happens. It
Oh
happens,
Lord.
and
Oh Lord, I just, yeah, bumping in, like I remember just being given a mic and they're like, you got to go interview this guy. So I grabbed the commentators. I'm like, tell me about him. Tell me about him. Tell me about him. And I was like, I heard you did this awesome charity foundation and you and your family contribute so much. And he was like, I don't want to talk about that. And like arms
Oh
up,
gosh.
walking away. And I was like,
Oh yes,
okay,
guaranteed. Every interviewer has their horror stories, and it's hilarious actually because that was part of what we trained. Going back to Ovally, our intern at Yahoo Esports, when we were training her, one of the scenarios we put her in was as if when she was. We put a scenario where I pretended to be a very difficult player who was being interviewed by her and would not answer or give her anything to work with. And we kind of like coached her through that and how to approach it. So you can definitely, guaranteed all interviewers have had a terrible piece of content or terrible moment happen while they were interviewing, but you can pivot and learn from it and take it as a valuable learning experience.
oh yeah, I learned a lot that day from that CS:GO tournament. I was like, oh, okay. Me thinking charitable donations are great, and this player was just not having it. So yeah, don't be afraid, kids. Just go out. See, it happens to the best of us. Happens to the best of us. Do you mind if I take a couple? Let's see if the students have any questions. If I grab some questions,
Yeah, sure.
I'll vet them though. Oh, we have, what was the biggest and best moment or experience with your Yahoo Esports journey?
Hmm. The best moment, like a particular moment? I guess, gosh, it's so hard. I think we definitely. Oh, I remember. Okay, so we had this crazy opportunity to interview BTS, the K-pop band, about esports. So I interviewed BTS. I think that has to be one of the best moments. We talked to them about Overwatch. I talked to them about StarCraft. They got super excited talking about video games. That has to be a highlight of my career.
See, all worlds collide together because when I worked for UYU, it was a very BTS focused company. You interviewed BTS, and that was like the opening. I remember when the CEO Jinhee introduced like the idea of you joining the team to me. She was like, I'm just gonna say this. She's interviewed BTS, and I was like, "All right, you're already in love with her just from that. It could be nothing gets done this weekend, but that's the gold standard of interviews, the BTS moment." Um, do they play esports?
Yes, they play
Oh,
games. They talked very passionately about Overwatch. Some of them talked about League of Legends as well and StarCraft.
yeah, yeah. The BTS. God, that must have been a huge. Do you have like people crying, being like, "Can I touch you? You breathe the same air as them."
I have had that happen before, yes.
Oh my goodness. I mean, it wasn't at UIU, was it? No, I'm just kidding.
It's very funny, but it was great. No, they were fantastic. They were super nice guys.
Yeah. For dealing with difficult talent, how do you kind of turn that situation around? Zorine and I have dealt with some difficult talent. We had a weekend of a difficult talent. So how do you kind of because I think you're phenomenal at it. I've seen you take just like a lemon and just make like a beautiful like glaze out of that lemon on a perfect dinner that is an esports event.
You're too kind. I think being communicative, a lot of the time talent is being difficult because there's been some sort of miscommunication where someone feels that their needs are not being met or there's something that's not turning out to expectations. So
Mhm.
being communicative is so important. I think we definitely, I definitely encountered that as well managing our team of writers at Yahoo, where sometimes a writer would be very stubborn about wanting to take an idea or a feature a certain way, but it wasn't quite a fit for, our editorial standard or the tone we were going for. So having to manage, sort of that a little bit of ego was part of the job as well. But being communicative is so important, and I think helpful into finding the root of the problem. And trying really like showing that you're trying working hard, genuinely hard, to find a solution that makes everyone happy.
And I'll do a final question because we're coming up to 45 minutes. So and I know you have a stream tonight. So for Canadians, because you're from Australia,
Mm-hmm.
how it like so esports, we always just see America as
Yeah.
esports. And should we have students have like serious looks at visas, America, and like jobs in America, or is it too much of a culture shock? Where should they kind of look for the future to kind of think of direction in their career paths?
Yeah, I say it really comes down to what they want to do. For me, I knew I wanted to go to America and be part of like the North American industry and the landscape there. Australia is great. There is a games industry in Australia, but it just wasn't, it wasn't what I had, it
Isn't it
wasn't, I didn't feel like
censored? Like the
it.
blood is green in Australia, I heard.
Oh yes, there is some censorship for games there in Australia, so that's a thing too. But esports, hadn't really fully developed there at the time, and it still even now is kind of sort of making baby steps. So I don't think the economy was there and the opportunities weren't quite there yet. So for me, going to the US was something that made sense. I think Canada's in a unique position in that it's part of North America. So, a lot of the time when we talk about the geography of esports and the industry and looking at demographics, we look at North America as a whole together. So that's, there's that advantage as well. You don't necessarily need to move to America. And especially now with the way COVID has changed the way people work, remote positions are definitely a lot more viable and attainable than they used to be. But that being said, if you want to be at the heart of something in particular, or say if you like League of Legends a lot, all the League of Legends teams are here in Los Angeles. If you want to work on the team side, maybe have to consider the fact that you might have to move to Los Angeles at some point, something like that. Like I definitely wouldn't rule it out, but at the same time, it's not crucial. And it's in terms of culture shock, I think the transition from Australia to America was not a huge culture shock. And I have visited Canada a few times before, and I don't believe it's a huge culture shock, but there are definitely like some minor things here and there which are different.
Can make it, kiddos. We're gonna be okay. Do you have time for one last question?
Yeah, sure.
All right. So what is your proudest piece of writing, whether it be an article or personal project?
Ooh, my proudest piece of writing. Probably, this is very random, but there's this feature I wrote a couple of years ago covering World of Tanks. It's like
Oh, okay.
such a niche game, but at the time, and I still think this might be the case, but World of Tanks was like one of the top revenue grossing esports. Sorry, games in general, but they also had this huge esports scene. And it was so bizarre to me that nobody was talking about how much money World of Tanks was making, and nobody seemed to question like where the money was coming from or why they had such a big audience and where like what the size of it was. Like there are like I think
Is
there's
it
like
blood diamonds? What is it? Where's this
yeah.
money? Yeah.
And I think what really drew my curiosity about it was like there are like the three richest people in video games. I think one is like Gabe Newell, who created Valve, makes sense. The other is like Notch, who created Minecraft, makes sense. And the third one is like the World of Tanks guy. So it's like, to me, I was like, this guy, like, they're making so much money and no one's really
Yeah.
asking why or digging into it. So I basically penned this like investigative feature where I got to travel around from Australia to South Korea to Poland to follow like the World of Tanks Esports League, and interviewed like a bunch of developers and staff from the World of Tanks team,
I
as well as
love.
players and people who worked in I guess the esports side of World of Tanks, and really, really dug into like what made this huge esport so huge, and at the same time why nobody had heard of it. So that was a feature that I was so proud of putting together. It took months to write and it took such a long time to pull everything together, but the end result was great. It got picked up by like all these communities. Reddit picked it up, and it actually did very, very well, metrics wise on the site. It's published on GameSpot, but it was, yeah, I was very proud of how it turned out.
I I love that. World of Tanks. Oh my goodness. I like, who would have thought, right? Cuz I saw the ads on YouTube and I never even thought about third richest. I love that you got to like follow the scene all the way to Poland. Oh my God, that must
Yeah,
have
it was
been so fun to write.
it was a crazy trip. Yeah. At some point, I was like, "What am I doing here in Poland?" And there's like tanks all around me. Like they pulled actual real life tanks to the tournament. It was crazy.
Oh my goodness. To be a fly on the wall as you wrote it. All right, let the students know where they can continue to follow your journey, to cheer you on, to big you up, to retweet your amazing content.
Thank you kindly. If you so wish, you can find me on Twitter. I am at Zorine. That's at Zorine. I also have some stuff on YouTube if you want to check it out. I have a interview series that Jackie referred to called Boss Battles, where I interview a group of women executives in esports. They're all amazing, amazing people and have amazing stories in how they attained the positions that they have now.
Beautiful. So be sure to follow. Students, please respect our guest space. Just do public tweets, and don't DM. Just give her space. But if you have questions, like, don't be afraid to reach out, because Zorine, she's, if anyone in the industry has the knowledge, it is Zorine. So you are all privileged to be with her here today. Zorine, thank you so much for coming out and talking. I'm so happy, and I'm so happy we got to catch up.
Likewise, thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure and it was great to answer your questions.
All right, you have a good one.
All right, thank you, everyone. Bye.
Bye.